Well, we're moving on to yet another project. This time it's the bridge over the River Wye.
Oh,
So, I guess kind of a takeoff on the movie.
right.
Anyway, this is the largest part of the large project of finishing the entire north end of the outdoor railroad. Now, we actually started on this project a couple months ago, and the very first thing we had to do was repair all of the damage done over the winter to the outdoor part of the railroad. Somebody made a smiley face.
Oh, it was funny. We had snow late in the year, and I just decided, why worry, be happy.
last snowstorm and a big smiley face.
Yes.
Anyway, during the winter, and we talked about this on the channel a little bit, we had what we call around here downslope winds, and it blew a lot of the buildings away outside, most notably the Nevermind.
Oh,
And it threw it all over the backyard and then buried it under the snow. So we actually had to wait for the snow to melt before we could even clean up the pieces, because walking around out there might have stepped on a piece underneath the snow.
right. In Utah weather, all you have to do is just wait a little while, and it will melt.
It did, yeah. And so at that point, I was able to go pick up all of the various pieces and kind of, well, let's say survey the damage and figure out just what needed to be done. But it was a disaster.
Yeah, it looks like it.
And while the Nevermind got the worst of it, everything out here got some damage to
Oh,
it.
it was, I wanted to cry.
All the buildings got shifted. The freight depot here, as you can see, tumbled across the railroad. At least this one didn't tumble off the railroad and across the yard.
No, but half its roof is gone.
Yeah. And when it breaks the glue joints like this, it's not that easy to fix.
No.
And then the roof on the water tank was missing. I looked everywhere for it. It's just gone. It, blew into the next county.
Probably.
But then as I was moving out the passenger depot, look what's tucked in behind the passenger depot.
Oh, wow.
So I was overjoyed to say, hey, and I just set it in place. But now it needs to actually be affixed on there so it doesn't get blown into the next county.
Right, otherwise the neighbor's going to go, what's that?
So I brought all of the various pieces of all the buildings inside and started the not terribly difficult task of figuring out just what's here, and the bigger issue, are there any pieces still missing?
Oh, gee.
So the first thing I did was separate out all of the parts and kind of inspect them. I also had to cut through some of the wiring, as it was just a big jumble and it was the only way I could take it apart. And then I also inspected the mechanism for the ore chute. It was apart, but everything seemed to be intact. Then I started inspecting the edges where all of this glues together. I had originally glued it all together with the glue that these kits come with, Uhu glue, or I think it's pronounced Uhu. It's supposed to be the sound of an owl. Anyway, it's a German plastic model cement. At any rate, when a building gets broken into pieces like this, it leaves residue all along the edges where the glue is on there, and I thought, well, maybe I can clean that off of there, but it would just take forever to try to clean up those edges. I've got these really cool clamps that I got from Micromart. They magnetic. They use like rare earth magnets, reach right through the plastic and hold everything together. And it held it into a nice square corner, but I could see that there's just too much old glue down in the joints to try to reattach it with anything even vaguely like the original glue. For what it's worth, these clamps came with this whole set here for assembling buildings and keeping them nice and square and everything. This building just happens to be way too big for this tool. Anyway, I loosely assembled the various parts of the building to make sure first I had everything, which I did, and then to make sure everything was going to fit together okay. But I needed to find a glue that I could use where I didn't have to take all of this original glue off. And so I decided on JB Weld. This stuff is indestructible, but it fills in gaps quite nicely, and you can also build up a fillet, if you will, of material on the back side of the joint because it's quite thick. So typical of these things, you squeeze out equal parts black and white on a piece of scrap material because it's going to ruin it. And then using a stick, you blend the whole thing together until you have a consistent color. Now this stuff takes 24 to 48 hours to completely set up. In spite of that fact, you only have about 15 to 20 minutes of really good working time, so you have to move quickly. So I spread a goodly amount into the joint along both sides of this wall. I can only do this one wall section at a time because of the short working time. And then once I got the joint together, I built up a fillet on the inside. Tried to clean that up the best I could, but since it doesn't show, I wasn't overly concerned. But I wanted a good amount of glue back here to really strengthen the joint. I was using a framing square to make sure that I got my wall sections perfectly square, and then I would temporarily hold the joint together using gaff tape. It's that cloth tape. The nice thing is it's very strong, but it easily removes. Don't confuse it with duct tape, which leaves behind a gooey residue that you will never get rid of. And then we had purchased a large plastic bag full of these large silicone rubber bands just to use in situations like this to tie everything together and hold it in place with a large rubber band.
That kind of looks like a model of a freeway system to me.
Oh, I think you found Los Angeles.
Yeah, the spaghetti bowl.
They all stick together.
Oh.
And it's just the weirdest thing. Silicone rubber bands are not like your regular garden variety used to go around the newspapers rubber bands.
Oh my.
They're just, and they all, it's like, yeah, sketties or something.
Oh my gosh.
It all gets stuck together in a big lump.
Good grief.
Fortunately, they come in different colors, so you can kind of tell where one leaves off and the other begins.
Yeah.
So once I got the lower section all finished, I had to start putting together the second floor. And the tricky part here is these walls stack on top of the lower walls, and they have to be held in perfect alignment there. But they each also have a butt seam right in the very center of the wall, and that's a very weak point because all you have are two sections tied together in a seam. But I thought if I build up a nice layer of JB Weld here, I think I can create a really strong glue joint on both of these walls. Moreover, once it's in place on top of the lower section and the floor is in, then these seams aren't under nearly as much stress as they are while you're working with them. Now the end wall on one end of the upper floor I want to tie together as tightly as possible using the JB Weld, but the other end of the second floor has to be removable, and so I have to do that a different way. So for now, the upper floor is just going to consist of two walls with a nice square corner here, and then I will tie all of that onto the lower level and get the floor in place, and at that point it should be quite strong. And then I took the other end wall and just secured that in place with some tacky glue because again this has to be removable. And then at that point I was able to add in the fourth wall, the other long wall, which has this interesting pop-out section which had not broken loose. It was still secured from the original build. And then I secured everything in place with the very large rubber bands and let that set up for 72 hours because I wanted to make sure that this was as strong as it could possibly be before moving on. And then I was ready to put the ore chute back in place and rework the mechanism here. Originally I thought, well, I don't care if that works or not. But once I started playing with it out on the railroad and dumping ore into trains, it was like, wait a minute, this is really fun. I want this to work.
This is what is referred to as playing with trains. I mean, literally.
Yeah.
Age does not mean anything.
Well, as a kid, I loved these kinds of features.
Well, I do, and I'm not a kid.
And I got all sophisticated. It's like, well, I don't do that. I'm a model railroader. And now suddenly I'm right back going, I'm putting kitty litter in the train.
Yes. Just don't put the kitty in there.
And don't let the kitty get anywhere near it.
No, or you're going to have a surprise. It is not a logging railroad.
Yeah, I don't want to haul logs. And so then I went through and just tacked everything in place with more JB Weld. Any place where any of these parts had started coming loose, I just tied everything down. And then where the bin attaches to the side walls, there's just a little tiny area there where they overlap, but I wanted that to be really strong, so I built up JB Weld at those corners as well, just to make doubly, triply sure. And you can see here why this end wall has to be removable. Should this chain pull loose or come off of the pulley or anything, there's not going to be any way to rethread that or rehang it in any way if the end wall is glued permanently in place. That wall has to be removable so you can get into this section to affect any kind of repair here on the mechanism. And so this end wall here is secured in place just with tacky glue. It holds it neatly in place, but should I need to pry it loose, that glue comes loose quite easily, and I can pull that entire end wall off to get to my mechanism. And then I secured the little end support here that holds up the end of the ore bin. I secured that using JB Weld, but it's a rather flimsy joint and a weak spot. You have to be quite careful moving the building around. And of course, typical of a hurricane, a couple of the windows got blown out.
Well, and it seems to work on small buildings as well as full-size buildings. The windows blow out.
Yeah, I seem to remember something from meteorology class about low pressure areas or something.
Right, something, but that's amazing. It would work on a small building too. Well, the upside, it's starting to look like its old self.
Yeah, it's strong.
I hope.
With the new glue joints and everything, it seems to be pretty darn strong. And this is something you've confronted a bunch of times.
Oh, no kidding.
You get a million wires in a confined space, and now that I took all the wiring apart, I now have to put all the wiring back together.
Right, figure out where it goes.
Fortunately, there's this board that's a floor, and once that's in place, it actually starts making a little more sense. It kind of keeps the wiring apart. But the floor is really in there so that the upstairs lights light up the upstairs and the downstairs lights light up the downstairs, so it feels more like a real environment in there.
Exactly.
Now, the roof had survived pretty much intact after tumbling completely across the yard. One of the hatches had come off, so I glued that in place. But I originally was holding the roof in place by adding some large styrene tabs that slide down inside the building so that the roof just slides down on top of the building. And just for purposes of making it even stronger, I increased the size of those tabs that go down inside the building. The roof has to be easily removable so that you can fill up the ore bin with, in this case, kitty litter. But the only way to fill it is to lift the roof off and then dump the material into the ore bin. And now just kind of more of the same, but on the other buildings.
Yes.
And first up, the little freight depot, because it had the worst damage. But also the passenger depot, once I started moving it out of place, it was trying to separate out into pieces as well.
Oh my gosh.
Fortunately, in this case, I could use the bar clamps.
Mm-hmm, those are handy.
And again, part of the trick here is making sure you keep everything in square, but as this mounts on the base, then that helps hold everything in alignment.
Yes.
Of course, this epoxy glue wants to get out from underneath there, and in places it doesn't belong. So it's just a matter of being extra careful to not let it get into places it doesn't belong.
Right.
And now I'm ready to move everything back outside and put it in place. The building originally was held in place with a simple screw going down into the cement board foundation that it sits on. Clearly proved to not be adequate, so this time I decided to drill 2 1/4-inch holes down through the cement board, through the layout, and bring 2 1/4-inch bolts down through the bottom of the railroad with thumb screws holding it in place. And at this point, I think it can withstand any downslope, wind, inland, hurricane, earthquake, whatever Mother Nature throws at us. Unless the whole railroad collapses, the building's not going anywhere. And because the wiring harness hadn't been damaged, just the wiring inside the building, at this point all I had to do was plug the building into the wiring harness and gee, all the lights came on. And all of the other buildings, well, their lights are mounted to the layout itself, so those never came inside. All I had to do was set the building back over the lighting system that was already in place. The exception to this is the Locomotive Joe light that I put above the Clear Creek sign here, and that's on a plug, so I had to plug that back in, and then that light came on. And now with all of the damage repaired, we're actually ready to move on to other things.
Yes.
Also, since it's now spring,
Oh, yes.
our goal now is to get this finished up before it gets too hot out here to work.
Yes.
So at any rate, the other problem being that at this point we also end up spending as much time gardening as we do working on the railroad.
Oh, right. That grass is growing so fast.
But that's garden railroading. The word gardening comes first.
Oh, yes.
But our goal is to finish this whole end of the railroad down here, the north end, before it gets too hot to work out here.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the main part of the project down here, the bridge over the River Wye. It's a truss bridge, and I want to build the whole thing up pretty much the way an original truss bridge would have been built. And it fits right in this area. This has just been temporaried in with a couple of 2x4s holding up the track. So first thing is to do some research and figure out just what a truss bridge is supposed to look like.
Oh, well, that's a nice looking one.
Yeah, this one's kind of my inspiration. This is going to be probably the closest thing to what I want to build out here, and yet it's got to be different than this one. And so that's required actually diving into the physics of the whole thing, the engineering, and figuring out just how a truss bridge, there's a pun there, a how truss.
The how truss.
The how truss. And all these different kinds of trusses. Anyway, I finally sort of decided on a bridge which is very, very similar to that first one that we looked at, and with some modifications. So the next thing to do is just draw it out.
Right.
I drew my plans out full size so that I can build my trusses directly over the plans. I've always thought that's a great way to proceed. And I also decided that I want everything bolted together. I'm going to glue it together just temporarily, but I'm not going to count on any of those glue joints to hold it in place long term. Everything's going to be drilled and then bolted together using these small bolts and screws. And then I also had to make my own truss rods and thread those so that they're actual functional truss rods, so that I'm not, again, counting on any glue joints anywhere to hold this thing together. Clearance is turning out to be a minor issue here. When I built the cliffs, I didn't fully allow for quite enough space to put this thing in, but I think a couple of sticks of dynamite properly placed in the cliff face should solve that problem, just like on a real railroad. And I've sort of been putting off weathering my Yagas Creek track here, such beautiful track, but I wanted to get rid of the shiny silver, so we'll be following up with another video here on just how exactly I went about painting the rails. And we also had to set up a drip irrigation system for the trees up here, so we'll be following up on a video about that. And there's some more cement work to do out here. I've still got some cliff faces that I need to finish up.
This reminds me of Cold Stone Creamery.
Ooh, it does look kind of yummy.
Yeah.
Or cake icing.
Yes, it'll stick to your ribs.
Yeah. Anyway, the goal is to try to make it look like rocks and not like cake icing or something. And I'm actually getting pretty good at this.
Yes, you are.
At first I was really intimidated by the process, but the more I fool around, it's like everything else.
Yes.
You kind of reach you kind of figure it out.
Yes.
And I've gotten to a point now where I'm getting pretty comfortable and actually enjoying this.
Yeah, it takes on an interesting hue. Well, this starts to look just like real cliffs. I mean, wonderful.
Yeah, I'm thrilled.
I am.
I'm just so happy with the whole process.
Oh, it is.
And we'll cover some of the details, some of the stuff that I've been learning going forward, because it has been a learning curve.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got a couple of shows to do on that. And the big news is Ed and the steam crew at Union Pacific are just about to leave Cheyenne on the Westward Bound tour.
Oh, that will be fun.
And on Tuesday, we've got an updated schedule, so you want to check that out. But there have been a few subtle changes to the schedule that we first put up a couple of weeks ago. But this is going to be so exciting.
Oh, yes.
And we're really looking forward to chasing the big boy around a bit. So, if you're not a subscriber to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. And the easy peasy way to subscribe is to click the blue button. Zoink! Right there, the blue button. Well, we're not sure how you found this video on the internet. We hope you didn't find it boring, and we will see you here on Tuesday.
Right.
See you then.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.